You know, I'm often called a genius. They say, Edison is the man who gave the world light. But the truth is, for most of my life, I was considered a failure. Teachers turned away, neighbors laughed, and even my parents sometimes doubted whether I would ever make anything worthwhile. I had to hear words that could break any child. You're too stupid to learn. But you know what? Those words became my fuel. I decided, if they don't believe in me, I will find a way to prove them all wrong. And today, as we look at the night cities flooded with light, I want to tell you how it all began. Not dryly and boringly, but honestly, with all the defeats, pain, laughter, and hope. Because my story is not only about inventions. It is a story about stubbornness, about the human spirit, about the fact that even the darkest night ends with dawn. I was born in the small town of Milan, Ohio. A small house, wooden floors, the smell of fresh bread from the oven. That's what I remember from childhood. At school, I was different. Instead of warmth and support, I met coldness and incomprehension. The teacher looked at me when I couldn't sit still again and sighed as if I was his biggest problem. Finally, he said to my mother, "Your son is too strange. He's not good at anything." That day, my mother took me by the hand, walked me out of school, and said, "Thomas, from now on, I will teach you myself. They may not see your intelligence, but I do." Can you imagine what that meant to me? She was the only one who truly believed, and her faith became my foundation. I was a boy with a noisy soul. I could spend hours taking toys apart to understand how they worked. I asked questions that made adults laugh. Why does the sun rise? Why do birds fly? Why is lightning so bright? They would twirl their fingers at their temples while I wrote down my ideas in a little notebook. It was hard for me. I wasn't strong. I wasn't rich. I didn't have any special privileges. But there was one thing that burned inside me, a fierce curiosity. And that's where it all started. Life wasn't going to give me presents. When I was still a teenager, I started working on the railroad. Imagine the roar of the trains, the smell of hot metal and grease, the screams of passengers hurrying to board. I sold newspapers and candy in the cars to earn a few cents for my family. It was my little business. I even rented a corner in the car where I kept my typewriter and printed the newspaper right on the road. That was when I felt for the first time, yes, I can create something of my own. But fate had other plans. One day, during the trip, trouble struck. When I tried to help the conductor, an accident occurred. A blow to the head, and the world changed forever. I began to lose my hearing. At first it was a slight deafness, but over the years it became stronger and stronger. For a boy who was so interested in hearing every sound, it sounded like a sentence. Imagine, the noisy world around you gradually quiets down. You no longer hear your friends' laughter so clearly. You no longer catch the birds singing. For some, this is a tragedy. For me, it's another test. People looked at me and said, "Poor guy. He's deaf. His life is over." But I found silence in it. And you know what's amazing? It was this silence that helped me. Without unnecessary noise, without distractions, I could immerse myself in thought. I could concentrate on experiments for hours, without even hearing anyone calling me. My lack of hearing became my weapon. What others considered a weakness turned into my strength. But the crises continued to fall. I had no stable income, and my family was waiting for support. My father looked at me and asked, "Thomas, when are you going to find a real job? How long can you play with these bulbs and wires?" He didn't see a future in my experiments. He wanted me to work on a farm or in a factory, bringing home bread, not some glasses and burnt wires. And at night, I set off small explosions in my laboratory in the basement. The neighbors complained, "Your son blew something up again. He'll burn down the whole block." The children laughed at me. "Oh, look, a madman with flasks." Sometimes even I asked myself, maybe they're right? Maybe I'm really wasting my life on nonsense? But as soon as this thought appeared, I saw before my eyes my mother, who had once said, "You are special, Thomas." You see things that others don't see. And I went back to the basement. One time, my experiment went so badly that an explosion destroyed almost all the equipment. I sat in the smoke, my hands black with soot, and thought, that's it. The end. I've given up. But do you know what I did then? I wrote in my notebook, one more try. Just one more. And I kept going. It was during these years that I learned the main lesson. No one is obligated to believe in you. Even your parents, even your friends, can doubt you. The only person who has to believe is you. When the whole world goes silent, when people look at you as if you are strange, that is when you have to keep going. And so, after all these failures and mockery, I began to take the first real steps forward. Small successes, small inventions. And even though there was little money, I felt that this was just the beginning of a long journey. I remember well the time when my largest laboratory was a tiny room with wooden walls and a low ceiling. The floor was stained with acid. The shelves were filled with glass flasks, jars of unknown powders, and coils of wire. The neighbors said it was a madman's room. For me, it was a workshop of the future. The smell of sulfur, smoke, and burnt wood was there all the time. Almost every day something exploded or burned. The neighbors swore, "This guy will set the whole town on fire." Sometimes even his father would come in and shout, "Thomas, enough with this nonsense. Go work, earn a penny." I listened to him, but my heart was elsewhere. I couldn't give up on experiments. Every explosion, every failure was not the end, but a clue. I began to perceive failures as lessons. If the bulb exploded, it meant I had learned what not to do. If the wire burned out, it meant I needed to find another metal. But you can't live on experiments alone. You had to make money. And that's when my first inventions started to bring in a little money. First, I improved the telegraph. It was something that really interested business. Imagine, the telegraph back then was like the internet today. Speed, news, communication. And when my device really started to work better than the old one, I felt for the first time that I could do something useful. The few dollars I made were like gold to me. But that wasn't what was more important. What was important was the feeling that I could make a difference in the world. That my ideas weren't just the dreams of a guy in a basement, but real things that changed people's lives. But the road was still hard. Money was desperately short. There were days when I went without dinner to buy new tools. I saved my last penny to buy batteries, wires, or glass for new bulbs. And even when my hands were black with dirt and my eyes ached from sleepless nights, I felt it was all worth it. I remember one time I got a big contract to build a printing press for a company. And while it wasn't a light in the dark, it felt like a real step forward. It was the moment I realized that my ideas could not only explode in my lab, but also benefit the world. And yet the laughter didn't stop. People kept calling me the bulb crazy. They saw only smoke and explosions. But I saw more. I saw a picture of a world where dark streets were lit up with light, where the human voice could be recorded and heard again, where machines worked because of the power of electricity. And, perhaps, at that time I did not yet have enough strength to convince others. But inside me was born that stubbornness that would not let go. I understood. No one has the right to decide whether my dream is worth the effort. I will decide it myself. And it was from that moment that my true transformation began. Because the small room with the explosions gradually turned into a factory of ideas, where instead of laughter, I heard the applause of the world. My early successes gave me what I had lacked most before: faith from others. People who had laughed at me yesterday suddenly started following me. Investors appeared who saw not only smoke and explosions, but also an opportunity. And then I decided to take a step that changed my entire life, to create my own laboratory, which I called Menlo Park. Imagine a huge room full of tools, wires, metal, glass, hundreds of bulbs and thousands of parts. There was always the smell of oil, hot iron, and electricity. Day and night it hummed, throbbed, like a huge heart beating faster than mine. It was a place where dreams were born. I called it the Idea Factory. But most importantly, I was no longer alone. I gathered around me a team of young and desperate people. They were as fired up as I was. During the day, we argued, shouted at each other, proved who was right. And at night, we sat together over experiments, falling from exhaustion straight onto the tables. It wasn't just work. It was a brotherhood of people obsessed with the search. It was there, in Menlo Park, that the first great inventions were born. The phonograph is the machine that first allowed the voice to be recorded. Imagine the reaction of the world. People stood stunned when they heard their own voice sounding again, as if from another reality. For me, it was one of the most touching moments, because then I felt my ideas really touch people's hearts. But, as always, with success came new difficulties. Bankers did not believe in my projects. They asked, "Why does the world need your phonograph? Who will pay for a voice recording anyway?" And competitors laughed. Edison invents toys, but the real money is made in factories and weapons. I knew one thing. You have to move forward, even when no one understands where you are going. And in those years, I realized that power is not only in the idea, but also in the ability to gather people around you who share your madness. Because alone you can do a lot, but a team can change the world. I began to live by the rule. Every day is a new invention. We worked without days off, without holidays. For us, the biggest holiday was the moment when some crazy idea became a reality. And that was when the path to the most important discovery of my life began. In the dark corridors of the laboratory, amidst the hum of machines and the smell of hot metal, I had an idea that seemed fantastic: to create artificial light that could burn for a long time and safely. A light bulb. It would seem like a simple thing, but for me it became the challenge of a lifetime. I remember the night my team and I first lit a filament. It glowed for a few seconds and then went out. We tried again and again. Thousands of different materials, hundreds of failed attempts. And every time it went up in smoke, someone on the team would throw up their hands and say, "This is impossible." And I just smiled. Impossible? We just haven't found the right way yet. I always said, I haven't failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that don't work. And this stubbornness kept me going. We worked through the night, our eyes burning with fatigue, our hands shaking with tension. And then one day it lit up. The small light bulb in the dark room glowed brightly, and for a long time. We stared at it, holding our breath, and then we burst into a scream of joy. It was the moment that changed everything. Then I realized, we didn't just create a light bulb. We gave the world hope for a new era. He always said, "I haven't failed. I've just found 1,000 ways that don't work." And that wasn't a good quote for a book. It was his life. Imagine that room. A table littered with broken glass, wires, burnt filaments. The smell of smoke and metal lingers in the air. The neighbors joke, "That crazy guy is smoking something again." And there he sits, burned, exhausted, but with a twinkle in his eye. He didn't see failure. He saw another clue, another path that led closer to the light. When others would have given up after the 10th or 100th time, he kept going. When banks refused loans, when friends advised him to do something serious, he gritted his teeth and kept going. And here's the important thing. He didn't just want to invent a lamp. He wanted to change the very idea of night. He dreamed that one day darkness would disappear and people would be able to live and work without fear of shadows. It wasn't a business plan, it was a belief. And then one evening a miracle happened. The thin coal filament didn't burn out right away. It caught fire and lasted. A minute, 2, 10, an hour, 5 hours. It shone like never before. And it wasn't just a victory of technology, it was a victory of the human spirit. When that soft, warm light lit up in that dark workshop, it seemed like the entire future had been lit. But the victory also brought new battles. The invention was just the beginning. The world had to be convinced. People laughed, said it was dangerous, that gas lamps were more reliable. Competitors were preparing attacks. Newspaper articles ridiculed him. And then he took a step that seemed crazy. he decided to light up an entire city. New York. He put lamps on the streets, in houses, in theaters. And when the first power plant came to life, when light shone in the darkness, thousands of people applauded. In those seconds, he proved the impossible is possible. But even here, when others would have enjoyed fame, he looked ahead again. For the lamp was only the beginning. He saw entire cities where the night does not frighten, but inspires. He saw factories that work around the clock. He saw children who read books in the evenings, not spoiling their eyesight by candlelight. And it wasn't just a story about electricity. It was a story about human courage. About how one person with a bunch of rejections, with 1,000 failures, with hundreds of ridicules can change the rhythm of the entire world. Because the truth is, his lamp wasn't just about light in the room. It was about light in the heart. That even in the darkest of times, you can find a spark to pierce the darkness. Light brought him fame. Newspapers began to write about the wizard from Menlo Park. Everyone knew his name. His lamps shone on the streets of cities. His companies grew. But along with the recognition came those who wanted to destroy him. Competitors raised their heads. A real war for the future of energy began. Some said, Edison is a genius. Others hissed, Edison is a fraud. And it was. Imagine a huge meeting room, packed with people, the newspapermen waiting for sensationalism, the shareholders waiting for profits. And he comes out and calmly says, we will build a network that will illuminate the entire country. And at that moment, half the room applauds, and the other half wags his finger at his temple. It was a risk, a gigantic one. He was putting everything he had at stake. And then another hero of this story appeared, the young Serbian inventor Nikola Tesla, who had his own vision. The famous war of currents began. Edison insisted on direct current, Tesla and Westinghouse on alternating current. Newspapers fanned the conflict. The public did not understand the technical details, but felt the drama. Edison persisted, demonstrated the dangers of alternating current, organized spectacular shows. This was his style. He played on emotions, on fears. But the truth is that he wasn't always right. And the world chose a different solution. It was a blow. He had to face defeat. It seemed that his era was ending. But it was here that he showed the main thing, perseverance. Because he didn't break. He didn't close the studio door and say, enough. He switched. He started working on other projects. The phonograph, the movie camera, the dictaphone. Again and again he challenged the impossible. Imagine that moment. A small hall, a device in your hands, and suddenly a voice sounds. Not live, but recorded. People freeze. It was magic. Or when he showed the first moving pictures, people couldn't believe that the image was coming to life. And he proved again, the world can be turned upside down. Yes, he lost, made mistakes, was often harsh, sometimes even unfair. But his burning desire to create did not stop. And this is the most important thing. He knew how to turn a crisis into fuel. And finally, the time came when even the greatest critics had to admit, Edison was not just an inventor. He was the architect of a new world. Because the world after him was never the same as before him.